I'm Sarah, 34, and I thought I knew my parents until last Christmas. They explicitly said no children at their annual party, including my 8-year-old daughter Emma. But when I showed up anyway, what I discovered in their study would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty. The photos, documents, and conversations I overheard that night revealed a 20-year deception that explained why I was always the difficult child, why Emma was treated differently, and why my inheritance had mysteriously vanished. Call to action. Before we dive into this family drama that'll make your jaw drop, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious Christmas karma, and don't forget to subscribe because, trust me, this revenge story has more twists than a holiday light display. You'll want to see how this family betrayal gets the justice it deserves. Growing up as the youngest of 3 children in the wealthy Matthews family of Connecticut, I always felt like an outsider looking in. My parents, Richard and Margaret Matthews, were the epitome of old money elegance. Dad ran a successful investment firm, Mom chaired multiple charity boards, and our colonial mansion was the envy of our affluent neighborhood. My older siblings, Michael and Jessica, seemed to effortlessly embody everything our parents valued. Michael, now 38, followed Dad into finance and married his college sweetheart from an equally prestigious family. Jessica, 36, became a successful attorney and gave my parents their first grandchild, a son they absolutely adored. Then there was me, Sarah, who chose to become a high school art teacher, married a middle-class accountant named Tom, and had the audacity to prioritize happiness over status. The differences in treatment weren't subtle. When Michael needed money for his MBA, Dad wrote a check without hesitation. When Jessica wanted to buy her first house, they provided a substantial down payment. But when Tom and I struggled with fertility treatments, needing just $15,000, suddenly money was tight and we needed to learn responsibility. When Emma was finally born after 3 years of trying, my parents' reaction was polite but distant, a stark contrast to how they'd celebrated Jessica's son, Dylan. Over the years, I noticed patterns that made my stomach churn. Emma's birthday gifts were always thoughtful but modest compared to Dylan's extravagant presents. Family photos somehow always positioned Emma slightly out of the perfect composition. During family gatherings, my parents would beam with pride when discussing Dylan's achievements at his private school, but barely acknowledge Emma's honor roll certificates from public school. The most painful incidents involved family traditions. The Matthews family had always done elaborate Easter egg hunts, with expensive prizes hidden throughout the estate. For years, Dylan found the best eggs while Emma mysteriously ended up with the consolation prizes. When I suggested maybe alternating who got the grand prize, Mom looked at me like I'd suggested burning down the house. "Some children are just naturally luckier," she'd said with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. Christmas was supposed to be the most magical time at the Matthews estate. The house would be decorated by professionals, with a massive tree in the foyer and smaller themed trees throughout the mansion. Mom would host her famous Christmas Eve party for all their friends, business associates, and extended family. It was the social event of the season, and for 20 years, I'd played my role as the dutiful daughter, bringing Emma to show off our picture-perfect family to society. But this year felt different from the start. When Mom called in November to discuss Christmas plans, her tone was unusually formal. "Sarah, darling, we've decided to make this year's party adults only. No children will be attending." The way she emphasized no children sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a party preference, this was personal. "What about Emma?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Emma is a child, Sarah. She'll be much more comfortable at home with a babysitter." Mom's voice had that edge it always got when she was trying to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. "But Dylan will be there, won't he?" I pressed, knowing my nephew, now 12, had attended every Christmas party since he was born. The pause was telling. Dylan is different. He's mature enough to appreciate the sophistication of the evening. Besides, Jessica specifically requested he attend because he's learning about business networking from the adults. There it was, the double standard that had poisoned my entire childhood. Dylan was mature. Emma was just a child. Dylan needed to learn networking. Emma would be more comfortable with a babysitter. Dylan belonged. Emma was an inconvenience. That phone call confirmed what I'd suspected but never wanted to admit. My parents didn't just favor my siblings, they actively excluded me and my daughter from the family inner circle. The wealthy, successful Matthews children deserved to be celebrated, while the modest teacher and her ordinary daughter were tolerated at best. As I hung up the phone, something shifted inside me. For 34 years, I'd accepted their treatment, made excuses for their behavior, and convinced myself that family meant unconditional love despite their conditions. But watching them deliberately exclude Emma, my innocent, brilliant, loving daughter, from family traditions awakened something fierce in me. Tom found me crying at the kitchen table that evening. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside me with his characteristic gentle concern. "They don't want Emma at the Christmas party," I managed through my tears. "Adults only, apparently." Tom's jaw tightened. He'd seen this pattern too, but had always been the peacekeeper, encouraging me to rise above their pettiness. "Maybe it's time we start our own Christmas tradition," he suggested carefully. But I was done being reasonable. I was done protecting their feelings while they trampled on mine. I was done teaching Emma that she should accept being treated as less than by people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to miss this party. I was going to attend, and I was going to find out once and for all why my own parents treated my daughter, their granddaughter, like an unwanted obligation. After years of accepting their explanations and excuses, I needed to understand what I'd done to deserve their contempt. What I discovered would be far worse than favoritism or even simple dislike. The truth was going to shatter not just my understanding of my family, but everything I thought I knew about my own identity. The days following that phone call were a blur of hurt feelings and growing determination. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this adults-only party than Mom was letting on. Her defensiveness when I'd asked about Dylan, the way she'd emphasized that Emma was just a child, something deeper was happening here. I started paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. During our weekly family dinner the following Sunday, I watched interactions with new eyes. Dad barely acknowledged Emma when we arrived, offering her a distracted pat on the head before immediately engaging Dylan in conversation about his school's debate team. Mom fussed over Dylan's meal, asking if he wanted seconds and complimenting his table manners, while Emma sat quietly eating, essentially invisible. The most telling moment came when Emma accidentally knocked over her water glass. It wasn't a big spill, just a few drops on the tablecloth, but Mom's reaction was swift and sharp. "Emma, sweetheart, please be more careful. This is grandmother's good china." Her tone was patient but strained, like she was making an enormous effort to be kind. When Dylan had spilled red wine on this same tablecloth 2 months earlier, Mom had laughed it off as boys being boys and called it character for the fabric. After dinner, while the adults retired to the living room for coffee, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The family photos lining the hallway had been subtly rearranged. Previous arrangements had included everyone equally, but now the most prominent positions featured Michael's family and Jessica's family prominently, while photos including Emma and me were relegated to less visible spots or removed entirely. There was one photo that particularly caught my attention, last year's Christmas morning picture. In the version currently displayed, someone had cropped it to focus on Dylan opening his presents, effectively cutting Emma out of the frame. I remembered that photo session distinctly because Emma had been so excited about the new art set Santa had brought her. Now, she was literally erased from the family memory. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the small slights, the subtle exclusions, the way conversation shifted when Emma and I entered a room. Tom noticed my restlessness and pulled me close. Talk to me, he whispered. I think they're trying to phase us out of the family, I confessed. Not just from parties, but from everything. Have you noticed how they talk about the future? It's always about Michael's career, Jessica's partnership track, Dylan's potential. When's the last time they asked about Emma's future or even acknowledged her accomplishments? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Last month, when Emma won that art competition, your mom changed the subject to Dylan's soccer game within 30 seconds. Exactly. And remember when Emma asked if she could display her painting in their house? Mom said the decor was curated and maybe Emma's room would be a better spot. But Dylan's finger painting from 3rd grade still hangs in Dad's office. The next morning, I decided to do some investigating. I started with family financial records that I had access to from years of helping Dad with basic bookkeeping during college. What I discovered made my stomach drop. There had been trust funds established for grandchildren. Plural. But according to the documents I could access, only one account existed, and it was in Dylan's name. When I dug deeper into inheritance discussions I'd overheard over the years, I realized Emma had never been mentioned. Not once. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was deliberate exclusion from family wealth, family legacy, and family future. My parents weren't just treating Emma poorly, they were systematically erasing her from their long-term plans. I called my friend Rachel, who worked in family law, and casually mentioned the situation. Hypothetically, I said, if grandparents were deliberately excluding one grandchild from inheritance and family benefits, what would that suggest? Rachel's answer chilled me. Either there's something seriously wrong with their judgment, or they don't consider that child to be truly family. In my experience, Sarah, when people exclude blood relatives from inheritance, it's usually because they question the blood relationship. That phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. They don't consider that child to be truly family. Suddenly, years of strange comments made sense. Mom's reaction when Emma was born, she doesn't look much like our side of the family, does she? Dad's constant comparisons. Dylan has the Matthews chin, just like Michael did at that age. The way they talked about genetics and family traits, always noting how Dylan resembled various relatives while never making similar observations about Emma. Were they questioning Emma's paternity? The thought was ridiculous. Tom and I had been faithfully married. Emma looked exactly like me at that age, and the timing of her conception coincided perfectly with our fertility treatments. But if my parents harbored doubts, it would explain everything. That afternoon, I made another disturbing discovery. While helping Mom organize her desk for her charity fundraiser, I found a folder labeled Family Medical History. Inside were detailed health records for all family members, including recent additions for Michael's wife and Jessica's husband. There were even preliminary records started for any future grandchildren Michael and Jessica might have. Emma wasn't listed anywhere. Not only was she excluded from the current family medical records, but there was no placeholder for her future medical information. It was as if my parents had decided she wasn't medically related to the family and therefore didn't need to be included in genetic health tracking. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. This wasn't about party planning or house rules or even simple favoritism. My parents had made a conscious decision that Emma wasn't truly their grandchild, and they were treating her accordingly. But why? What had convinced them to doubt her parentage when there was absolutely no reason for suspicion? Tom and I had been together since college, married for 10 years before Emma was born, and there had never been any infidelity or question about our relationship. As I sat in my car outside their house that evening, staring at the perfectly manicured lawn and the warm lights glowing through their windows, I realized I needed to know the truth. Not just about their treatment of Emma, but about what had convinced them to exclude her so completely. The Christmas party was still 2 weeks away. I had 2 weeks to figure out what my parents really believed about my daughter and why they'd made such a cruel decision about her place in our family. What I discovered would be far more devastating than simple prejudice or unfounded suspicion. The truth would reveal a betrayal so deep and calculated that it would destroy not just my relationship with my parents, but my understanding of everything I'd believed about my own life. My investigation intensified over the following week. I started by revisiting conversations and events from Emma's early years, looking for clues I might have missed. The more I examined my parents' behavior, the more convinced I became that their doubts about Emma weren't random. They had a specific reason for questioning her place in the family. The breakthrough came when I was helping Jessica plan Dylan's upcoming birthday party. We were at her house, going through family photos to create a memory board, when I noticed something strange. Jessica had multiple copies of professional family portraits spanning several years, including some I'd never seen before. Where did these come from? I asked, pointing to a series of photos from Emma's second birthday party. Jessica glanced over and her expression shifted slightly. Oh, those. Mom had a photographer come to document the party. She said it was important to capture family milestones properly. But as I looked through the photos, I noticed something disturbing. While there were dozens of shots of Dylan playing, eating cake, and interacting with relatives, there were very few of Emma. And in the photos that did include her, she was consistently positioned at the edges or partially obscured by other family members. Did Mom give you specific directions about these photos? I pressed. Jessica's discomfort was obvious. Sarah, you know how Mom is about photography. She likes things to look cohesive. Cohesive how? My sister-in-law hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She wanted to make sure the photos showed the core family prominently. Her words, not mine. The phrase core family felt like a slap. Emma was 2 years old in those photos, barely a toddler, and already my parents were categorizing her as outside the core family unit. That evening, I decided to confront Michael directly. He'd always been the golden child, the one most likely to know about family decisions and financial planning. I called him under the pretense of discussing Christmas gifts for the kids. Michael, can I ask you something honestly? I began after we'd covered the mundane details. Of course. Do Mom and Dad seem different about Emma compared to Dylan? The long pause told me everything. Sarah, I don't think I'm the right person to discuss this with you. Why not? You're my brother. If there's something happening with their relationship to my daughter, I need to know. Another pause. Look, they have their concerns. But it's not my place to explain their thinking. What concerns, Michael? Emma is their granddaughter. What possible concerns could they have? Sarah. His voice carried a warning. Some things are better left alone. They love you, and they're trying to do what they think is best for everyone. Best for everyone except Emma, apparently. It's complicated. Then uncomplicate it for me. But Michael refused to say more, ending the call with vague promises to talk later that we both knew would never materialize. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. Everyone in my family seemed to be operating with information I didn't have, making decisions based on assumptions I couldn't understand. The secrecy and coded conversations were driving me to distraction. The next day, I made a decision that felt extreme but necessary. I was going to search my parents' house. I had a key from years of helping with their plants and mail when they traveled. I knew their schedule. Dad played golf every Thursday afternoon, and Mom had her standing appointment at the salon. I would have at least 2 hours to look for whatever evidence existed about their feelings toward Emma. Walking into their house that Thursday felt surreal. This had been my childhood home, the place where I'd felt safe and loved for the first 18 years of my life. Now I was sneaking through it like a stranger, searching for proof of my own family's betrayal. I started with Dad's office, going through files methodically. In his personal documents, I found what I was looking for: correspondence with a private investigator. The letters were dated from 2 years ago, right around Emma's 6th birthday. My hands shook as I read the investigator's report. Dad had hired someone to look into Tom's background, specifically focusing on his activities during the time period when Emma would have been conceived. The report was thorough and invasive, detailing Tom's work schedule, social activities, and personal relationships during that crucial time frame. But more disturbing were the handwritten notes in Dad's margins. Verified timeline, check for inconsistencies, confirm paternity opportunity. My father had spent thousands of dollars investigating my husband to determine whether he could possibly be Emma's biological father. The investigation had found nothing suspicious. Tom's schedule during Emma's conception was completely accounted for, and there was no evidence of any relationship issues or opportunities for infidelity. The investigator had concluded that there was no evidence to support doubts about paternity and recommended that the client consider alternative explanations for any perceived discrepancies. But Dad hadn't been satisfied with that conclusion. In a follow-up letter, he'd asked the investigator to expand the search to include my activities during the same time period. I found that report too, and reading it felt like a violation so profound I had to sit down. The investigator had tracked my movements, my friendships, even my medical appointments during fertility treatments. They'd interviewed people I'd considered friends, asking carefully worded questions about my marriage and my behavior. Again, the investigation had found nothing. I had been exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I'd told everyone I was doing. The report concluded that both Tom and I had been completely faithful, and Emma's parentage was beyond question. But then I found the final piece of the puzzle, and it made everything crystal clear. In Mom's desk, hidden behind insurance papers and old tax returns, I found a folder labeled Sarah, Medical. Inside were copies of Emma's birth certificate, her early medical records, and a letter from our fertility specialist confirming the successful treatment and pregnancy. But paperclipped to these legitimate documents was something that made my blood run cold: a forged DNA test. The document was professionally produced and looked completely authentic. It claimed to show DNA results comparing Emma to Dad, concluding that there was no biological relationship between grandfather and granddaughter. The test was dated 6 months after Emma's birth, which meant my parents had been operating under this false information for almost 8 years. The test was fake, I could tell, because it included genetic markers that didn't exist in any legitimate testing panel, and the lab listed wasn't a real facility. But it had been crafted well enough to convince my parents that their suspicions were correct. Someone had deliberately created false evidence to convince my parents that Emma wasn't their biological granddaughter. But who would do such a thing? Who had access to enough family information to create a convincing fake? And what did they have to gain from destroying Emma's relationship with her grandparents? As I sat in Mom's chair, holding the forged document that had poisoned 8 years of my daughter's life, I realized this was bigger than favoritism or misunderstanding. Someone in my family had orchestrated a deliberate campaign to exclude Emma from the Matthews legacy. And I was going to find out who, even if it meant destroying every relationship I had left. The pieces were falling into place, but I still didn't know who had created the fake DNA test or why. As the Christmas party approached, I developed a plan. I would attend as originally intended, but instead of confronting my parents directly, I would use the evening to observe and gather more information. With all the key family members present, including extended relatives and family friends, I might be able to identify who had both motive and opportunity to orchestrate this deception. I arranged for Emma to stay with her best friend's family for a sleepover, telling Tom I needed to handle this situation alone. He was reluctant but understood that this confrontation had been building for years. The night of the party, I arrived deliberately late, when the social dynamics would be well established and people would be comfortable enough to speak freely. The Matthews estate was transformed into a winter wonderland, just as it had been every year of my childhood. But now the beauty felt hollow, like an elaborate stage set hiding something rotten underneath. I moved through the party carefully, listening to conversations and watching interactions. My parents were in their element, playing the perfect hosts to Connecticut's social elite. Michael and his wife were holding court near the fireplace, discussing investment strategies with Dad's business partners. Jessica was networking with other attorneys, while Dylan moved confidently among the adults, charming everyone with his precocious observations about current events. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated gathering Emma would have loved. She was articulate for her age, genuinely curious about the world, and had always enjoyed talking with adults about art, books, and her latest school projects. But she wasn't here because my parents had decided she didn't belong. I was nursing a glass of wine and pretending to listen to a conversation about charity fundraising when I overheard something that made me freeze. So grateful that Richard and Margaret finally came to their senses about the situation, someone was saying behind me. I turned slightly and recognized Mrs. Pemberton, one of Mom's oldest friends and a notorious gossip. "It was becoming quite awkward at family gatherings," her companion replied. Everyone could see the differences, but no one wanted to say anything. "Well, DNA doesn't lie," Mrs. Pemberton said with satisfaction. "Better to acknowledge reality than continue the pretense. That poor little girl will be better off knowing the truth." My heart started racing. These women knew about the DNA test. They were talking about Emma like her parentage was established fact, discussed openly among my parents' social circle. "Though I do wonder about the timing," the other woman mused. It seemed convenient that Jessica discovered the truth right when the inheritance discussions were becoming serious. Jessica. The name hit me like a physical blow. Jessica had been involved in discovering the truth about Emma's parentage. But that made no sense. Jessica was my sister. She loved me. We'd always been close despite our different life choices. Or had we? I excused myself from the conversation and made my way toward the bathroom, needing time to process this revelation. But as I passed Dad's office, I heard voices inside and recognized Jessica's laugh. "Can't believe she still doesn't suspect anything," Jessica was saying. 8 years, and she's never questioned it. "Well, Sarah was always naive," came Michael's voice. "Too trusting for her own good. Lucky for us." The inheritance restructuring went through without a hitch. Dylan will get everything, just as it should be. And Emma? What about her? She's not a real Matthews anyway. The DNA test proved that. I felt like I was drowning. My siblings, my own brother and sister, were talking about Emma like she was some kind of imposter they'd successfully exposed. But I knew Emma was Tom's daughter, which meant the DNA test was fake. Which meant... "I still can't believe you managed to get a sample for testing without anyone knowing," Michael continued. "Piece of cake. Sarah's always been careless about leaving Emma's things around. A few hair strands from her hairbrush when we were babysitting, and voila, definitive proof that she's not Dad's biological granddaughter." "But how did you explain getting Dad's DNA for comparison?" Jessica laughed again, and the sound made me sick. "I didn't need Dad's DNA. I just needed Mom and Dad to believe the test was legitimate. Dr. Harrison owed me a favor after I helped him with that malpractice suit last year. He created the fake results on his personal letterhead. Mom and Dad never questioned it because it came from a medical professional." The room started spinning. Jessica, my own sister, had fabricated evidence to convince our parents that Emma wasn't their granddaughter. She'd stolen hair from Emma's brush, commissioned fake DNA results, and presented them to our parents as legitimate medical evidence. "But why?" Michael asked, voicing the question screaming in my head. "Because Emma was a threat to Dylan's future," Jessica said matter-of-factly. "You know how Mom and Dad are about fairness and equal treatment. If they believed Emma was truly their granddaughter, they would have insisted on dividing everything equally between the grandchildren. Dylan would have gotten half of what should rightfully be his. And Sarah? Sarah made her choice when she decided to become a teacher and marry beneath her station. She was never going to contribute to the family legacy the way we have. But Emma was an unknown quantity. Bright, talented, potentially successful. She could have claimed an equal share of everything we've worked to preserve. My sister had destroyed my daughter's relationship with her grandparents to ensure her own son got a larger inheritance. Plus, Jessica continued, it solved another problem. Sarah's always been Mom and Dad's favorite, even if they never admitted it. The baby of the family, the artistic one, the one who could do no wrong. Having Emma in the picture meant Sarah would always have leverage, always have a way to claim attention and resources. This way, Sarah becomes just another obligation instead of a priority. The cruelty was breathtaking. Jessica hadn't just targeted Emma, she'd calculated how to diminish my entire position within the family structure. Do you ever feel bad about it? Michael asked quietly. Bad? Michael, we preserved our family's wealth and ensured it goes to someone who will actually honor the Matthews legacy. Dylan will go to the right schools, marry the right kind of person, and continue what Dad built. Emma would have been raised with public school values and middle-class expectations. She would have squandered her share or given it away to some charity. We did the right thing for the family. I had heard enough. My sister, who I defended, supported, and loved unconditionally, had orchestrated an 8-year campaign of emotional abuse against my daughter based on lies and greed. She'd convinced our parents that Emma wasn't their granddaughter, stolen my daughter's inheritance, and destroyed years of potential family relationships. But as I stood there in the hallway, shaking with rage and betrayal, I realized something else. Jessica thought she was so clever, so careful in her manipulation. But she'd made one critical error. She'd confessed everything within earshot of someone who could expose the truth. And unlike her, I had evidence. I had the fake DNA results, the correspondence with the investigator, and now I had her confession. She'd spent 8 years building a lie, but it was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. I quietly pulled out my phone and began recording, capturing every word of their continued conversation about how they'd manipulated our parents and planned to continue excluding Emma from family benefits. They talked for another 20 minutes, detailing exactly how they'd crafted the deception and coordinate their stories over the years. When they finally finished congratulating themselves on their successful fraud, I had everything I needed to destroy them both. But I wasn't going to expose them quietly or privately. Jessica had chosen to humiliate Emma and me in front of the family's entire social circle. She'd turned Emma's supposed illegitimacy into gossip for country club conversations. So I was going to return the favor. In front of everyone she'd tried to impress, everyone she'd lied to, and everyone who'd participated in excluding Emma from family events, I was going to reveal exactly who Jessica Matthews really was. The party was about to become very interesting indeed. I walked back into the main party area with my phone still recording, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The elegant crowd was exactly as I'd left them, sipping champagne, discussing business deals, and admiring Mom's Christmas decorations. But now I saw them differently. Many of these people had participated in excluding Emma, had whispered about her supposed illegitimacy, had treated my 8-year-old daughter like she was somehow less worthy of love and respect. I positioned myself near the grand piano, where the acoustics would carry my voice throughout the room, and cleared my throat loudly. "Excuse me, everyone," I called out, my voice cutting through the refined chatter. "I'd like to make an announcement." The conversations gradually died down as faces turned toward me. I could see my parents' confusion, Mom's slight frown of concern about this breach of party etiquette. Michael and Jessica had emerged from Dad's office and were standing near the fireplace, both looking puzzled by my interruption. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Christmas with the Matthews family," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "This party has always been about showcasing our family values, our commitment to each other, and our dedication to truth and integrity." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Dad looked pleased, probably thinking I was making some sort of toast or acknowledgement of their hospitality. "Which is why," I continued, "I think it's important that everyone understand the real reason my daughter Emma isn't here tonight." The room fell completely silent. I could see Mom's face pale slightly, while Jessica had gone very still near the fireplace. "You see, 8 years ago, someone in this family convinced my parents that Emma wasn't their biological granddaughter. They provided DNA test results that seemed to prove Emma wasn't related to Dad, wasn't truly a Matthews, and therefore didn't deserve to be treated as an equal member of this family. Gasps and whispers started throughout the room. I could see Mrs. Pemberton leaning forward with obvious interest, while other guests exchanged confused glances. Based on this evidence, my parents made the heartbreaking decision to exclude Emma from family inheritance, family traditions, and family love. For 8 years, they've treated their own granddaughter as an outsider because they believed she wasn't truly their blood. Sarah, Mom's voice was sharp with warning. This isn't appropriate dinner conversation. You're right, Mom. It's not appropriate dinner conversation. But it's also not appropriate to spend 8 years psychologically damaging a child based on lies. I held up my phone. Because that's what it was, lies. I have here a recording of Jessica and Michael, made just 20 minutes ago in Dad's office, confessing to fabricating the DNA evidence that convinced you Emma wasn't your granddaughter. The effect was immediate and electric. Jessica went white as paper, Michael started toward me as if to stop what he knew was coming, and my parents stared at me with expressions of complete shock. Sarah, you don't know what you're saying, Jessica called out, but her voice shook. Don't I? I pulled out the fake DNA results I'd found in Mom's desk. You mean I don't know that you stole hair from Emma's brush when you were babysitting her? I don't know that you had Dr. Harrison create fake DNA results on his letterhead as a favor? I don't know that you did all of this to ensure Dylan got Emma's share of the family inheritance. The room erupted. Guests were turning to each other in shock, some moving closer to hear better, others stepping back from what was clearly becoming a family explosion. I could see several people pulling out their phones, probably to record this themselves. Jessica found her voice and tried to take control. This is ridiculous. Sarah's obviously having some kind of breakdown. Everyone knows Emma doesn't look like our side of the family. Emma looks exactly like me at that age. I shot back. She has my eyes, my nose, my artistic ability, and my stubborn streak. She looks nothing like Dylan because they're not related through their fathers, they're related through their mothers. Me and you, Jessica. I turned to address the crowd directly. For those of you who've been whispering about Emma's parentage for 8 years, who've treated her like she doesn't belong at family gatherings, who've excluded her from conversations because you believed the gossip, you've been participants in child abuse based on lies. The accusation hit the room like a bomb. I could see several guests looking ashamed, while others appeared genuinely shocked by this revelation. Michael, I called to my brother, who was still standing frozen near the fireplace. Would you like to explain to everyone how you helped Jessica coordinate this fraud? How you both agreed that Emma was a threat to Dylan's future and needed to be eliminated from inheritance considerations? Michael's mouth opened and closed without sound. He looked desperately at Jessica, at our parents, at anyone who might rescue him from this moment. Or shall I play the recording where you both congratulate yourselves on successfully manipulating our parents and destroying an 8-year-old's relationship with her grandparents? That's enough. Dad's voice boomed across the room. He'd found his composure and was clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Whatever family disagreement this is, it should be discussed privately. Family disagreement? I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. Dad, your daughter committed fraud to steal from her own niece. She created fake medical documents, manipulated evidence, and convinced you to emotionally abuse your granddaughter for 8 years. This isn't a disagreement, it's a crime. The DNA test was legitimate, Mom said shakily. It came from Dr. Harrison's office. Mom, look at the document. I walked over and handed her the fake results. Look at the lab name. Look up that facility online right now. It doesn't exist. Dr. Harrison created this as a personal favor to Jessica after she helped him with a lawsuit. As Mom stared at the papers with growing horror, I continued my address to the room. Jessica didn't do this out of concern for family accuracy or genetic truth. She did it because she wanted Dylan to inherit everything instead of sharing with Emma. She calculated that destroying Emma's relationship with her grandparents was worth the emotional trauma to an innocent child. Jessica finally found her fighting voice. Everything I did was to protect this family's legacy. Sarah chose to marry beneath her station, chose a middle-class life, chose to raise Emma with public school values. Emma would have squandered her inheritance on charity or given it away. Dylan will preserve what our family has built. There it is, I said, turning back to the crowd. The real reason. Not genetics, not legitimacy, not family honor or greed. Pure, calculating greed. Jessica was willing to psychologically torture a child for 8 years to ensure her son got a bigger inheritance. The room was completely silent now except for the sound of champagne glasses being set down on tables and the rustle of evening gowns as people shifted uncomfortably. I could see several guests filming with their phones, and I realized this confrontation would be all over social media within hours. Sarah, stop this immediately, Dad commanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. I could see him looking at the fake DNA results Mom was holding, and doubt was creeping into his expression. Why should I stop, Dad? Because it's embarrassing? Because your prestigious friends are seeing who you really are? Because you're realizing you've spent 8 years rejecting your granddaughter based on lies? I pulled out my phone and started playing the recording. Jessica and Michael's voices filled the elegant room, clearly discussing their manipulation of the DNA evidence and their satisfaction with successfully excluding Emma from the family. As their recorded voices detailed the fraud, I watched my parents' faces change from confusion to horror to rage. Mom actually staggered and had to grab Dad's arm for support when she heard Jessica laugh about how easy it had been to fool them. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. 8 years, Mom whispered, staring at Jessica with an expression of complete betrayal. 8 years we believed. We treated Emma like she wasn't your granddaughter, I finished. Like she was some kind of imposter who didn't deserve your love, your time, your inclusion in family traditions. Do you remember her 6th birthday party, Mom? When she asked why she couldn't have a sleepover at your house like Dylan did. You told her that some children needed more attention than others. Mom's face crumpled. Oh God. Sarah, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected. When that fake DNA test confirmed your worst suspicions about my marriage, about my choices, about my daughter, you were relieved. It gave you permission to treat Emma as less than family without feeling guilty about it. The crowd was starting to murmur now, people whispering to each other about what they'd just witnessed. I could hear fragments. Can't believe Jessica would. That poor little girl. What kind of person does that to a child? Jessica seemed to realize she was losing control of the narrative entirely. This is all taken out of context, she called out desperately. Everyone knows families have complicated dynamics. We were trying to prevent future conflicts. By traumatizing an 8-year-old? I shot back. By making Emma believe she was somehow defective or unworthy of grandparents' love. By excluding her from Christmas parties and birthday celebrations and family photos. I turned to address Dad directly. Do you want to know why Emma stopped asking to visit you? It's because every time she came to this house, she felt your disappointment in her. She's 8 years old, and she could sense that you didn't consider her a real Matthews. She started making excuses not to come to family dinners because she knew she wasn't welcome. Dad's face was ashen now. He was a man who prided himself on fairness and integrity, and the realization that he'd been manipulated into emotionally abusing his granddaughter was destroying him in real time. How do we fix this? He asked quietly. You can't, I said simply. 8 years of psychological damage isn't something you can fix with apologies or gifts or suddenly including Emma in family events. She's learned that love is conditional, that family is based on performance and genetics rather than commitment. She's learned that the people who are supposed to protect her can be turned against her by lies. The party guests were starting to file out now, clearly uncomfortable with being witnesses to such intimate family destruction. As they left, I heard whispered conversations about calling lawyers, about social services, about whether Jessica could be prosecuted for fraud. But I wasn't finished yet. As the last of the party guests filtered out, exchanging hushed whispers and shocked glances, The remaining family members stood in the suddenly enormous-feeling living room. The Christmas decorations that had seemed magical hours earlier now looked garish and hollow, like stage props for a play that had gone terribly wrong. Jessica had collapsed into one of Mom's antique chairs, her face buried in her hands. Michael stood behind her, looking like he wanted to disappear entirely. My parents sat together on the couch, holding hands for what looked like mutual support, staring at me with expressions that mixed horror, guilt, and something that might have been respect. "The question now," I said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room, "is what happens next." Dad cleared his throat, seeming to age 10 years in the past hour. "Sarah, we need to know what you want from us. How do we even begin to make amends for what we've done?" "What I want?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I want the last 8 years back. I want Emma to have grown up knowing her grandparents loved her unconditionally. I want her to have memories of Christmas mornings here, of being included in family photos, of feeling like she belonged somewhere bigger than just our little household." Mom was crying quietly, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the fake DNA results. "We can give her new memories. We can start over. Can we?" I challenged. "Emma is 8 years old now, not a baby. She knows she's been excluded. She knows Dylan gets different treatment. She's spent years trying to figure out what's wrong with her that makes her grandparents love her less." The weight of that reality seemed to hit everyone simultaneously. Jessica looked up from her hands, her makeup ruined, her carefully styled hair disheveled. "Sarah, I never meant for Emma to be hurt emotionally. I thought if she wasn't included from the beginning, she wouldn't know what she was missing." "You thought wrong," I said coldly. "Children aren't stupid, Jessica. They notice when they're treated differently, when they're excluded from family traditions, when adults stop talking when they enter a room. Emma has been asking me for 3 years why her grandparents don't love her the way they love Dylan." "What did you tell her?" Mom whispered. "I lied. I made excuses. I told her you were busy, that you showed love differently, that she was imagining the differences. I gaslit my own daughter to protect your feelings and preserve family peace." The admission tasted bitter. "I enabled your abuse by making Emma question her own perceptions instead of confronting your behavior." Michael finally found his voice. "So, what do you want us to do now? Do you want us to confess to Emma? Do you want us to explain that we were tricked?" "I want you to understand that this isn't about you anymore," I replied. "This isn't about your guilt or your need for redemption or your desire to fix what you've broken. This is about Emma and what's best for her going forward." I walked over to the mantel where family photos were displayed and picked up the recent Christmas portrait, the one that had been cropped to exclude Emma. She doesn't trust easily anymore. She's cautious around new people, afraid of getting too attached in case they decide she's not worth loving. That's what your 8 years of conditional affection has taught her." Dad stood up slowly, looking every one of his 72 years. "Tell us how to help her. Tell us what we can do. First, you need to understand that trust is earned, not demanded. Emma doesn't owe you forgiveness or a relationship just because you were deceived. If you want to be part of her life going forward, you have to prove that you've changed, not just apologize for being manipulated." I turned to Jessica, whose tears had started flowing again. "And you need to confess to Dylan. Your son is 12 years old enough to understand right from wrong. He needs to know that his advantages came at Emma's expense, and he needs to decide for himself what kind of person he wants to be." "Sarah, please," Jessica pleaded. "Dylan doesn't need to know about this. It would destroy his relationship with us. Like you destroyed Emma's relationship with her grandparents?" I shot back. "Dylan has been complicit in this exclusion, even if he didn't understand why. He's old enough now to make his own choices about family relationships based on truth instead of lies." Mom was studying the fake DNA results again, shaking her head in disbelief. "Dr. Harrison could lose his medical license for this. Creating false medical documents, even as a favor, is serious fraud." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "Which brings us to the legal implications of what Jessica has done." The room went very quiet. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide with sudden fear. I could press charges, I continued calmly. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly child endangerment, depending on how the prosecutor views 8 years of psychological manipulation. The fake DNA test alone is a felony in Connecticut. Sarah, you wouldn't, Michael said desperately. Jessica is your sister. Jessica is the person who stole 8 years of Emma's childhood, I corrected. She's the person who turned my parents into child abusers based on lies. She's the person who prioritized money over the emotional well-being of an innocent 8-year-old. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. But I'm not going to press charges. Do you know why? Jessica shook her head, not trusting her voice. Because Emma deserves better than having her family's destruction play out in courtrooms and newspapers. Because she's been through enough trauma without having her parentage and her grandparents' gullibility become public entertainment. The relief on Jessica's face was premature. However, I continued, there will be consequences. Real ones. I walked over to Dad's desk and pulled out a legal pad, then began writing as I spoke. First, the inheritance. Emma gets half of everything currently allocated to Dylan. Not as a gift, not as charity, but as her rightful share that was stolen from her through fraud. Sarah, Dad started to protest. This is non-negotiable, I cut him off. For 8 years, you've been planning Dylan's financial future while ignoring Emma's. That ends now. Emma gets equal treatment in all inheritance planning, trust funds, college funds, everything. Jessica was staring at me with undisguised hatred now. You're punishing Dylan for something he didn't do. I'm correcting an injustice that you created. Dylan will still inherit more than most children could dream of. He just won't get Emma's share on top of his own. Second, I continued, family events. Emma gets equal treatment at all gatherings, equal positioning in photos, equal attention and gifts. No more cropping her out of pictures, no more relegating her to the children's table while Dylan sits with adults. Of course, Mom said immediately. That should have been happening all along. Third, Jessica and Michael are banned from unsupervised contact with Emma until she's old enough to decide for herself whether she wants a relationship with them. Sarah, that's not fair, Michael protested. Fair? I laughed harshly. Michael, you participated in a conspiracy to defraud an 8-year-old out of her inheritance and family relationships. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges. You'll see Emma at supervised family gatherings, and that's it. And fourth, I said, looking directly at Jessica, you will make a full confession to Dylan, to your parents, and to anyone else who is influenced by your lies about Emma's parentage. You will make it clear that Emma is and always has been a legitimate Matthews family member who was excluded based on fabricated evidence. Jessica's face was red with anger now. You can't force me to humiliate myself. I can't force you to do anything, I agreed. But if you don't voluntarily confess and make amends, I will press charges. I will make this public. I will ensure that everyone in your professional and social circles knows exactly what you did to a child for money. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of destroyed relationships and shattered trust. 8 years of carefully constructed lies had been demolished in a single evening, and everyone in the room was going to have to figure out how to move forward with this new reality. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more consequence that needed to be addressed. The weeks following the Christmas party revelation brought changes that rippled through our family like stones dropped in still water. The first and most immediate consequence was Emma's reaction when I finally told her the truth carefully, age-appropriately, but honestly. I found her in her room one evening, working on a painting of our small family. Just the 3 of us, her, me, and Tom, surrounded by warm colors and protective space. It broke my heart to realize she'd internalized the exclusion so completely that she'd stopped imagining herself as part of a larger family unit. Emma, sweetheart, we need to talk about Grandma and Grandpa Matthews, I began, sitting on her bed. She didn't look up from her painting. Did I do something wrong again? The question was a knife to my chest. No, baby. You've never done anything wrong. But I need to explain why they've treated you differently than Dylan. What followed was one of the hardest conversations of my life. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her aunt orchestrated years of emotional manipulation based on lies? How do you help a child understand that adult love shouldn't be conditional without making her lose faith in all adult relationships? But Emma surprised me. After I finished explaining, in the simplest terms I could manage, that Aunt Jessica had told lies that made Grandma and Grandpa believe she wasn't really their granddaughter, Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "So they didn't stop loving me because I was bad?" "They never stopped loving you, Emma. They just got confused by lies. And now they know the truth. Are they sorry?" "Very sorry. So sorry that they want to make things better if you'll let them." Emma considered this seriously, the way she approached all important decisions. "Can I think about it?" "Of course you can. You don't have to decide anything right now." The rehabilitation of Emma's relationships with her grandparents became a slow, careful process. Dad was the first to reach out, appearing at our door the week after New Year's with a gift, not an expensive toy meant to buy forgiveness, but art supplies. High-quality brushes, paints, and canvases, because he'd finally paid attention to Emma's passion for art. "I'd like to learn about painting," he told Emma carefully. "Would you be willing to teach me sometime?" Emma studied his face with the intensity she usually reserved for her artwork. "You really want to learn? It's kind of messy." "I like messy," Dad said, and for the first time in years, I saw him smile at Emma without reservation. Mom took longer to find her approach. The guilt was eating her alive. I could see it in the way she'd lost weight, the way her hands shook when she talked about Emma. Finally, she asked if she could take Emma shopping, not for clothes or toys, but for ingredients to bake together. "I want to learn your favorite recipes," Mom told Emma. "I want to know what makes you happy." These small gestures didn't erase 8 years of damage overnight, but they were genuine attempts to build new relationships based on truth instead of assumptions. Emma remained cautious, but curious, testing these new dynamics carefully before investing emotionally. The consequences for Jessica and Michael were more severe and immediate. Jessica's law firm launched an internal investigation after rumors of her involvement in document fraud began circulating among our parents' social circle. While the fake DNA test didn't directly involve her professional practice, the ethical questions about her character led to her being passed over for the partnership she'd been counting on. Michael faced his own reckoning when several of his investment clients, who had been at the Christmas party, began questioning his integrity and transferring their accounts. The Matthews family reputation for honesty and ethical business practices had been built over decades, and Jessica's actions tarnished everyone associated with the name. But the most significant consequence came from an unexpected source, Dylan himself. 2 months after the revelation, Dylan approached me at a family dinner, the first one Emma had agreed to attend since learning the truth. He was taller than I remembered, clearly growing into the confident young man my parents had always bragged about. But his expression was troubled. "Aunt Sarah, can I talk to you privately?" We stepped out onto the patio, where he stood quietly for several minutes before speaking. "Mom told me what really happened with Emma," he said finally. "About the fake DNA test and everything." I waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I knew something was weird," he continued. "I knew Emma was treated differently, but Mom always said it was because she was younger, or because Uncle Tom wasn't really family yet, or whatever. But I knew it was more than that." "What are you thinking, Dylan?" He looked at me with eyes that seemed too old for his 12-year-old face. "I'm thinking that what my mom did was really messed up. And I'm thinking that I probably got stuff that should have been Emma's." The maturity in his response surprised me. "What do you want to do about that?" "I want to share. Like, actually share, not just give her my old stuff. I want to split the trust fund money, and I want Emma to be included in everything going forward. And," he hesitated, "I want to get to know her better. Actually know her, not just see her at family dinners where everyone's being weird." Dylan's decision to actively include Emma and advocate for equal treatment became a turning point for the entire family dynamic. When a 12-year-old could see the injustice and choose to correct it, the adults had no excuse for maintaining the status quo. Jessica initially fought Dylan's decision, arguing that he was too young to understand the financial implications. But Dylan stood firm, and eventually Dad supported him, restructuring the inheritance to reflect true equality between the grandchildren. The revelation also led to unexpected personal growth for me. For years, I'd accepted my family's subtle dismissal of my choices, internalizing their message that my career and lifestyle made me less valuable than my siblings. But confronting their lies about Emma forced me to examine all the ways I'd allowed myself to be diminished. I started setting boundaries I'd never established before. When Mom made disparaging comments about public schools, I called her out instead of changing the subject. When Dad implied that Tom's middle-class background made him less suitable for family business discussions, I insisted that intelligence and integrity mattered more than pedigree. Most importantly, I stopped apologizing for the life I'd chosen. Emma was growing up in a household that valued creativity, kindness, and authenticity over status and wealth. Those weren't consolation prizes, they were deliberate choices that reflected our family's values. As I sit here now, 6 months after that explosive Christmas party, Emma is painting at the kitchen table while Tom helps her with a school project. She's scheduled to spend next weekend at her grandparents' house, her choice, made without pressure or manipulation. She's cautious still, but she's learning to trust again. The Matthews family looks very different than it did a year ago. Jessica and I may never fully repair our relationship, but Emma now has grandparents who see her clearly, cousins who advocate for her inclusion, and parents who will never again prioritize family peace over her emotional well-being. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or elaborate schemes, it's simply refusing to accept lies as truth and demanding that love be unconditional. Emma learned that family isn't just about blood or money or meeting other people's expectations. It's about choosing to show up for each other, especially when it's difficult. The question I want to leave you with is this: have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and protecting someone you love? How did you handle it, and what would you do differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories about standing up to family dysfunction and fighting for what's right. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to demand better treatment from people who claim to love you. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best family revenge is simply living authentically and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Your future self will thank you.